Really nice to meet you. My name is Horatio, founder of YDWC, and I'll be chairing today's debate. And I'll just say a few words before we get stuck into the debate itself. So it was Edward E. Cummings who said, the most difficult battle that any man has to face is to be nobody but yourself in a world which is constantly every day striving to make you everybody else. And for many families, the most important thing is providing a platform for their children to be the very best thing that they can be. So growing up in a West African household, I can tell you that it was a series of daily prayers every day where God was informed of the potential job opportunities that my parents wanted me to be able to pursue. So it was either president, prime minister, doctor, judge, lawyer, and I think there were a few others that made the shortlist. And every day there was a focus. Horatio, we made sacrifices for you. We have been praying. It is important that you get to wherever it is that we need you to get to. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm prime minister yet, or perhaps judge, or any of those other pieces. I think I've hopefully got some level of time to see if the prayers have been effective in that space. But before then, they emphasized there was not only going to be an importance around education, and I had to be the top of my class, 98, 97, I'm looking at Maxine, she was like, 97, 98, what kind of nonsense is that? 100 is the only thing that we're looking at. Not only is it the case that you need to be the top of the class, but more specifically, you have to be a good boy. You have to be a decent boy. Now, this is really, really interesting for me because the good boy, decent boy thing in that day was probably around make sure that your hair is cut, make sure that your tie, you know how to tie it, bow tie, do you understand how a black tie event works, so on and so forth. But now as I understand it and I reflect on it, what she was really thinking about in my mum's context or in my dad's context was social capital. What they really wanted me to be able to do was to be able to fit into the professional world, understanding the sacrifices that they had made to come here to the UK, to understand what the social environment was like. They wanted me to be in a space where actually they felt that I could navigate those same things that they may have felt were difficult. And so being a good boy, being a decent boy was actually being a person who understood how to build relationships. And more specifically, there was a real challenge around or question around how it was that I was going to go about doing that. And that becomes the focus of today's conversation. We all want the best for our children, but what is the advice that we give to them about how they become successful? How is it that they advance the lives that they want to lead? Is it the case that they should emphasize their similarity with majority populations as a strategy for improving their lives? That is the question before the House today. That is what we are going to be debating here. So in a moment, I'm going to be turning to an array of incredibly talented speakers who are going to take us through today's debate. And just to give you a really quick overview, I'm going to tell you in a moment what you have voted for in terms of where we sit. It seems like there's an even balance at this moment in time between people saying yes, no, and maybe. I'll get the exact figures to you for those who are watching and for those in the room as soon as I can. But just for now, it does seem like there's an even split. And we're really interested in you being involved in this debate. And so you'll see in a moment, there will be an opportunity for you to ask your questions through the Menti chat. Final thing that I will say before we actually kick off the debate. So you'll see these lovely people in front of me. They're each going to have 5 minutes to make a case to you. Those on the side to the right of me, if you're on screen, they're the left of me. They are the proposition. They are going to be proposing this motion, suggesting that, yes, we should be thinking about how we emphasize our similarity. And over here on this side, we have the opposition who are going to be, again, on the opposite side of that. Each of them, whilst they're making their 5-minute speeches, will have the opportunity to be interrupted by people from the other side. Not from the audience, because then we won't get anywhere. Everyone will jump up at the same time. But if you see them standing up and doing this thing saying, point of information, not only does it look really weird, but it's actually them trying to get the attention of the other team. And you'll see sometimes they'll say stuff like, yes, I'll take it, or no, no, thank you. And usually that's where people laugh. It is a really interesting experience. You've heard enough from me. We are now ready to start today's debate. And so it's it's my real pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, speaking on the side proposition, Faith Olabegi.
So I'm going to start today's debate by stating that I agree with the above statement. The reason why I agree with this statement is because I believe it's important to have unity and a common purpose when meeting business needs. It's important to establish a common goal. I'm sure when you look at your business website, you see that you all have a mission statement that you have all agreed and know to meet. We're not saying that you have to change who you are, but it's important to have that unity so that you're able to meet business needs and ensure that what you're doing is correct. You can bond on mutual different things. So it could be football, it could be what workout you're doing at the gym. And the most common one over team is, what is the weather like? I'm sure we had a bit of sun today, so I'm sure you're enjoying the sunlight today after a lot of rain. So I'm going to have 2 points today. So it's talking about mission statement, especially when it comes to applying for jobs, and also the importance of relationship building. So to start off with my first point, when applying for a job, the first thing that you do commonly is look at what the mission statement is, and you see how you can apply that to yourself when it comes to coming across and demonstrating yourself in interviews and applications and so on. So I feel like it's important it's not a bad thing to have similarities to the company, because of course you want to ensure that this is a place that you're fitted and ensure that you're well suited. And also alongside, of course, you'll talk about differences that you bring into the table and where you are unique and stand out in that space. In addition to that, talking about relationships as well, to bring a funny story about how I met my colleague to the right of me today, we first started talking about traveling. And we were talking about the different countries that we've been to, and we've came to the conclusion that we are going to become travel buddies. So if anybody wants to, no, thank you. If anybody wants to join us and become travel buddies, of course we can talk afterwards, and I can give you my contact details so we can have a travel buddy chat. But it's important to establish relationships to ensure that we're able to get in contact with our colleagues, to build mentors and so on, so that we're able to progress within the workplace.
Question. Would it be better for you and your couple buddy to go, oh, we've both been to Spain and had fun, or to point out that you've had different experiences in life and actually there are different places that you want to go to simulate that discussion?
We can do both. Like I said before, you don't have to we can bring ourselves to work, but it's important that we have unity. And it's okay to have similarities and differences. We're not saying that you shouldn't be different, but it's important to be the same. I mean, it's important, to bring ourselves to work and have unity at the same time.
Thank you so much. So you can see a really, really interactive and fun opportunity that we have for all of you watching today. The only thing I was going to quickly ask is if the technical team could move the slides so that we are now in the question and answer piece. There we go. So if anyone in the audience is already at the edge of their seat and thinking to themselves, I have so much that I want to say, if you're in the room, all you have to do is relax. You can put your hands up later. But if you're in a virtual space, you're going to have to type them in, but we will come to your responses very, very soon. So on that basis, we're really happy to move the debate on. And I call upon our first speaker from side opposition, who will be Ben Doyle.
Ladies and gentlemen, I grew up in Malaysia. So Malaysia is an ethnically rich country with a lot of food and people and languages. And when I was 13 years old, I was put into a boarding school where I was the only Chinese boy there. And during my time there, I tried to be like them, like the majority. I felt However, I think I felt alone because, no matter how much I sounded like them, I didn't look like them. No matter how much I behaved like them, I didn't quite understand their inside jokes because they all had quite different childhoods compared to mine. So the realization I had is that no matter how much I try to be them, I can never change certain aspects of my identity. And I think proposition would want us to change our lives and to assimilate into majority culture. We don't think that is correct. So no, thank you. So two things we would want to achieve. The first, we think that emphasizing your similarities or assimilating into majority culture is harmful. And second, even if you do get to assimilate into majority culture, it is not that great. And we'll explain why in the three of our speeches. So the first thing I would like to talk about is why it's quite difficult to properly assimilate into majority culture. So I think quite often, there are some factors that distinguish between individuals from the majority and individuals from the minority. And it goes beyond just culture and behavior. So it's not like you can just adopt a new lifestyle and practice what the people in the majority practice. For example, like, I don't know what like white people do. They like skiing, maybe. They like riding horses. Maybe they don't like to season their food. So these are certain behaviors we think you would have to adopt as part of the majority culture. No, thank you. But we think that there are certain parts of your life that you cannot change. For example, your physical features, your skin color, your hair, your eyes. These are constant reminders that you can never be part of them. Your accent and the way you speak, there are certain pronunciations that are often different, and it will subconsciously come out from time and again. But there are also certain trademarks in your life, like the way you grew up, the songs you listened to, the stories that your mother told you when you were naughty. These are things that you do not get to change because this was your identity and this is how you were born. So we think that there are three important parts to note here. The first is that no matter how hard you try, people from the majority will never truly relate to you. You can never be a part of their brotherhood because of these features. And these are visible and tangible features that you can't necessarily change, which means that these are reminders that you're indeed different. And the problem here is that you often feel different as well. You can try to change, but you will never be able to reach the same level as they would expect you to be. And that's quite a problem because the harm to this is that you will never be able to truly express yourself. And what that means is you'll never be able to express anger and joy in the same way that is unique to you, but instead you express emotions through a medium of someone else's identity, someone else's culture, the way how the majority expresses those emotions. And so you develop this kind of feeling that you're a fraud, imposter syndrome. This is why it's quite harmful to assimilate into majority culture. But second, you can never never be a part of them. And the problem with this is that you set such a high benchmark for yourself that you keep working at it and you keep trying to be a part of them. And it's quite problematic because if you can't get there, you start blaming yourself. You think, maybe I should eat more of the food that they like. Maybe I should buy the clothes that they wear. And maybe I should talk the way that they talk and listen to the shows, listen to this music that I don't even like to listen to. And you keep blaming yourself that you can't necessarily be a part of them. And that's quite a daunting journey. Second, why does assimilation destroy the connection with your past? I think part of the assimilation process is that in order to be part of the majority culture, it requires you to first reject the identity that you previously had. It means you need to first denounce the food that your mom makes for you and call it smelly. It means that you will be appalled at the idea of certain music and the clothes that you wear. But even if you feel like you still have a bit of your identity left within you, in order to be part of the majority culture, you would subconsciously put that identity, your previous identity, below it. You would start creating hierarchies between which accent is better and which sounds better. Sure.
You don't have to change your music, right? You can still say Malaysian rap music, but you can connect over the fact that you or your colleague both have that. It's not always about deep connections. You can just have a good networking chat. Isn't that better?
Yeah, but in order to emphasize your similarities, you would first have to also adopt their similarities. What is considered important to the majority is their culture and not yours. So if you talk about similarities, they don't really understand why your similarities are important. They would think that their culture is best, what they practice is most important. Why is this harmful? The first harm, it harms your loved ones, your family and your friends that you grew up with, that understand how you feel, is no longer going to call you part of their family. These are safe spaces that you would otherwise lose because they will call you a sellout. And that's problematic because if you ever need a safe space to fall back on, these are the people that will be there for you and that understand how you feel, but they will no longer accept you. But lastly, we think that assimilating into majority culture is not cheap. There are a lot of things that you require to be part of majority culture. You need to go to certain schools, you need to take up specific hobbies. People even buy skin whitening creams, and that's quite problematic. The comparative is that only privileged minorities get to assimilate into majority culture, and that marginalizes quite a lot of other individuals in the world as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I know what you're thinking in the audience. We've only had 2, and we're having so much fun already. I know. This is what we have in store for you today. So, just for your awareness, after the next 2 set of speeches, we're going to go into the audience to get your questions. And I can see that some of you are already commenting on Menti, and other people in the room will be having those questions warming up in your mind. So we'll come to you in a moment. But before then, it's my real pleasure to call upon the next speaker from side Proposition, Prashati Saxena.
Quite a nice speech by Ben. Unfortunately, on the wrong topic, because this isn't about assimilating yourself completely into somebody else's culture, changing yourself. See, I grew up slapping Spanish creams on my face, bleaching my face before I visited any Western countries, just so I would assimilate or look more like the people there did, just so I didn't feel different, because my parents grew up in a culture, a post-colonial culture like that, and nobody told them otherwise. Nobody told me otherwise until I got here. But this debate isn't about that, right? I want to remind you that this debate is about having an emphasis, just a mere emphasis on the similarities that you have with other people and why that is specifically good. Because as you have similarities, I think you also come to a point where you discuss your differences, you discuss things that are different about you. But to get to that point, you have to make sure you're actually able to make a good connection with the person you're talking to. You're able to at least talk to them, communicate with them, able to safely explore the sides that you wouldn't necessarily explore with everybody else, right? And I think the second thing to note here importantly is that for a lot of ethnic minorities, I think this is important, is that a lot of times you do things like networking, you just meet people, and not everything is about forming a deep connection with them, right? You don't have to beat yourself up about just sharing, I don't know, similarities on football just because you or your culture doesn't necessarily follow it as much. Like India is huge on cricket, not as huge on football, but probably don't have to beat myself up by thinking that I'm changing myself. I'm probably just trying to have a conversation. But I think the starting point is that conversation. But to get to that starting point in and of itself, it is important to emphasize on those similarities in the first place. Because if you're not able to get that other person talking or connect to that other person itself, it's unlikely you're going to be able to even talk about your differences. I'll take you in a bit. So may I ask you what you work as? Yeah.
I'm a management consultant.
You're a management consultant. Cool. Say you're walking on the street and someone comes up to you and says, I don't know, they want to talk to you about, say, debating. At first, there are 2 scenarios. If in the first scenario, they tell you, hey, I saw you at this, I don't know, consulting firm or conference. I'm a consultant too. You chat for a couple of minutes about consulting and then they get on to debating. Are you more likely to listen to their stuff about debating then, or are you more likely to listen to someone who just randomly comes up to you, talks about debating, about why they like debating more than management consulting?
I'm going to take the fifth from that one.
So the idea is basically that it is human nature to want to be familiar, to see things familiar to you, to connect with people you're similar with, to just talk about common points because you want to be comfortable to the person you're talking to otherwise. As an ethnic minority, you already face billions of challenges living in a country where your culture is in the majority, right? Just to get to the starting point where you're able to comfortably talk about your differences with someone else is something that takes time. But the starting point is making sure you're connecting to someone else in the first place. But also note, I'll take you back in a second, is that what Ben says is that you just stop you have to reject your identity. You have to do things like give up your safe spaces. I don't think that's true. You can stay in touch with your identity, your culture. It's not mutually exclusive, right? Because at the end of the day, you go back to the same people. You go back home to your parents. They know how hard it is living as an ethnic minority. They're still going to be there for you always. You're still going to go to your local church, meet the same people, I don't know, every weekend. So you're still in touch with your culture. It isn't something that you're giving up. You're just expanding yourself to be able to assimilate with more people. I think that is incredibly important. Before I talk about why this is a legitimate strategy for ethnic minorities to make their lives better, I will take Ben, yes.
Yeah, so if emphasizing similarities is important and it makes you comfortable, wouldn't minorities start to adopt majority lifestyle and practices so they have more similarities to talk about?
But I don't see what's bad about that, right? If it is something you're comfortable with, then go for it. Because as much as your own culture, your background matters, I think it is important to legitimize the idea that individuals might find other cultures interesting. They might find other things that they like. And I think there should be no shame in adopting those if you don't like it. Obviously, it is about adopting things that you're comfortable with and that you like. I want to lastly talk about why this is a legitimate strategy for ethnic minorities, because know that at the end of the day, this is a debate that should be benefiting them at the end. And I think this is legitimate because there are only a few things that you can control in life. And the one thing you can control is how you come off to someone in the first instance, how you're able to talk to someone else, how you're able to communicate with them, how you're able to put across your ideas. If you want to be more efficient, you should be controlling the things that you can control in life. Other things like your accent, your skin color, where you're from, you can't control. But making sure you establish that connection with, I don't know, football or consulting is important. You should be tricky with it. It's tricky, but I think it's likely to help you have a more convenient life. And I think little is better than nothing. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much for the speech that we've just heard from the second speaker from side proposition. And on that basis, I'm very, very happy to call upon our next speaker, the second speaker from side opposition, who will be Tim Lowe.
Kenza and Josh had the privilege, or rather the misfortune, of meeting me as a 17-year-old kid. A 17-year-old kid who spoke some English, but is totally unaware and not attuned to the culture in the UK. I think fast forward to now, I'm moderately more confident, integrated well, and had heaps of friends in the UK. And when I look at this motion, I've asked myself, what strategy have I adopted to reach this stage of, being properly integrated in the UK? And I would say certainly it wasn't abandoning my cultural roots and gearing my life towards a majority way of life to reach this stage. I think it was an emphasis on differences as opposed to similarity, where that was the strategy that many, many of my peers, including Ben, who belongs to ethnic minority groups, have adopted in order to settle in this country. Firstly, a response to their case. The biggest claim coming from them is to say, this is not mutually exclusive at all. Obviously, in any social conversations you have with anyone, you might bring up similarities or differences. The question in this debate is about the emphasis that is being placed in conversations. And if we show there are harms that accrue from adopting a way of life that gears towards a majority life, we comfortably win this debate. 2 points in my speeches. The first is basically challenging the case. The premise is to say, you can assert yourself and claim you're, similar to the majority group. I think Ben has given you good analysis as to why, characteristically, there are unique differences that you have with regards to your skin color, your childhood, your accent, and your family background compared to the majority group. No, thank you. But I would add an extra reason of why that is extremely problematic. It's because most ethnic minority groups are much more likely to internalize a sense of inferiority against the majority group. You're more likely to cultivate an instinct of comparison as if the majority way of life is a barometer for cultural assimilation. And that instinct is particularly problematic when it turns to reality. It is a reality in which you constantly feel unease with who you are, as Ben has talked about. But even if you do, to put the case to the very best, that you manage to lead two lives, one at home and one at workplace, espousing different sets of cultural values, I think you're more likely to develop a sense of guilt in questioning your own culture. And more likely you're going to attract people within your community as to whether you've betrayed the very set of culture that you belong to. And no, this harm doesn't stick right now. I think it happens in the long run as well. when middle-class parents coming from ethnic minority backgrounds would tell their kids that there is only one pathway of success, which is to pander towards the majority culture, I think you do not leave these children realistic and meaningful choices as to what life they should develop and the way of socialization they should adopt. Secondly, I think beyond an individual level, it is extremely harmful for community. Because, as Ben has told you, to know the social language and to pander aggressively to the majority groups requires some level of economic and social capital. But the issue is you leave many more people behind for reasons beyond that. The first is to say that you're more likely to feel socially alienated if you see your friend who can mix with a lot of majority, kids, but then you feel you can't do so. You instinctively see yourself as a failure. But secondly, you literally have the worst of both worlds, because if you cannot assimilate within the majority group, the minority group would also see you as some sort of, a betrayer in regards to, actively adopting values that does not belong to your own community. And so you literally do not have access to both sets of support from different communities. But even if you don't accept that, I think the worst harms that comes from their side is this, where the majority group can literally point fingers and create stereotypes of what model immigrants and model migrants or model ethnic minorities are. The onus shifts back to the minority to decide how they should live their lives because they're empowered to police the social language. Before I go on, sure.
If promotions are decided on the golf course, why does it make sense for me to refuse to learn how to play?
I think firstly, this is the problem that rests in the case, where they're still feeding to the metric of the world where golf course drinks should be the way to achieve social promotion. In our side, at least in the long term, when social conversations are normalized, when people appreciate each another's differences, that's a pathway for greater mobility, as opposed to cherry picking some, a number of success on their side of the house. Back to the point. I think when you allow minority to conduct gatekeeping on who fits in and who doesn't, they can literally point to the majority of minority groups and say they have not, managed to integrate, whereas some minority has managed to integrate. Why don't you do that? I think that's harmful on their side. Ultimately, make no mistake, I think Team Proposition are suggesting not only a communicative response in social conversations, but rather they entrench a default way of response that dismisses your own cultural roots. And worse, how you perceive yourself, as Ben has given you sufficient analysis on. Integration is comparatively better achieved on our side, and social mobility is as well, because firstly, integration and social mobility should be a two-way street. You share to others of your own values and your own backgrounds, and even if that is unaccepted by the majority, we're slowly and incrementally changing things for the better. Secondly, they support a dystopian conception where we're venturing into a culturally homogenous world, where social mobility is achieved at the expense of what values the ethnic minority group stands for. They systematically lock out people. They don't achieve mobility in the long run. Immensely proud to oppose.
I'm looking in the audience at the moment and I'm seeing some very, very edge of seat faces, some smiles from the management consultancy. Just like comedy. Once you've been brought out once, that's it. You're stuck in. All right, awesome. So what's going to happen is in a moment, I'm going to get any hands that we have from the audience, but I'm just going to stand up for a moment because just beyond, you won't see it in the actual screens, there is a set of questions that I'm going to read out. And what will happen at this stage is I'm simply going to read all of the questions that we have from online. Once those have been read, we'll turn to those who are in the room, and then the debaters will not answer you immediately. They will incorporate any responses in their concluding speeches. So, question number one, from the audience, why should ethnic minorities have to bear the burden of assimilating or emphasizing similarities? It can lead to mental exhaustion when you are constantly trying to prove that you are fitting in. That was question number one. On to question two. Without assimilating, is there not still benefit in finding common ground that we as humans have inherently through shared basic experiences? And question number three that has come through is, if you focus on the differences, i.e. features, does this not hinder yourself in trying to create friends, colleagues, and relationships which are generally based on how well you relate with someone? Really fantastic questions from the audience that are online. Virtual have done their piece. I now come to the physical audience. Physical audience, what are your questions? Great, we have one over there. If you want to stand up, give us your name, nice, loud and proud, and your question.
Jack Jass, I'm a reinsurance broker for Gallagher Re. I'm here with my colleagues Abby and Natalie. We were having a conversation before the debate began. We were like, despite being your true self, how often do you find subconsciously you try to fit in?
Very, very powerful question. And a round of applause for the man in the room. So for those who are online and might not necessarily have heard it, the question was, despite doing your best to kind of be you, how do you not necessarily see that subconsciously you are actually seeking to fit in? Really powerful question. We have another. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Natan. I'm a management consultant also. And it was based off the point just made now. In an age where you are constantly changing, if you try to hold yourself back in maintaining who you were before, are you just holding back your progression?
Really powerful question. So for those who are, again, virtually not with us, but only hearing my voice, annoyed or excited, however you may be at this point, the suggestion is, if you are not actually conforming, are you essentially just holding yourself back? We have two further questions. We'll go one and then two.
One was from what I've my name's Lompe and I work at BP and I'm here with Isaac and Dave also from BP. From what I understood, you kind of encourage minorities to change themselves or emphasise their similarities before they can then be themselves. But should we not be encouraging the majority to see the differences and be open to them before someone has to change themselves? And my second question is, you talked about if a golf course is the way to promotion, why should I not learn to play golf? Similarly, if smoking cigarettes with your manager is the path to promotion, would you recommend that everyone should, or young people entering the workforce should go buy a pack of cigarettes and start smoking?
Very, very powerful questions. So for those who are with us virtually, the first was, shouldn't we actually be placing the focus on majorities actually understanding the minorities? And then the second was a really interesting analogy where they explained, well, if there is some form of pressure for us to actually learn how to play golf, what if the pressure was for us to learn how to smoke? Would we suggest that we actually encourage people to do that also? Great question. We come to our final question from the room. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Abby Barla and I'm from Gallagher, along with Jag and Natalie. So the motion is about it being better to emphasise our similarities, and traditionally as humans, the better we become at it, the more we do something because we're better at it. So at what point do you stop? And as human nature, you continue, and then are we at risk of groupthink for both the minority and the majority, so that we just blend in and we no longer are seen as different and therefore potentially disposable, and we're not, and our value isn't seen by the majority either.
Amazing question. So both in the virtual and the physical space, I can definitely say everyone can give themselves a pat on the back. It has been strong. And the question that we just had there was, at what point do you stop? If it is the case that we are all just conforming and becoming similar, is it the case that there's a risk of groupthink where we all actually just become and think in the same way? So really powerful set of questions. I'm very comfortable to be sitting in the seat that I'm in as chair, where I don't have to be the one who is answering them. But even though I'm not, we have some really talented debaters who will give this a shot. And so in typical debate fashion, the proposition both open and close the case. So that means in this instance, we're going to turn first to our opposition speaker to close the case for side opposition. So on that basis, we're very, very happy to call upon the speaker from side opposition who's going to close the case for their team, Josh Ashworth.
You got to write an inspiring figure, right?
Okay, so initially, when we thought we had oceans of time, we had asked speakers to say who their most inspirational person was. Of course, we haven't done that, but Obviously, one speaker really wants to point out their inspiration, and he had highlighted that his inspiration was his mum.
There we go. There we go. That wasn't just kind of a self-promotion. Like, I genuinely love her. Not just because she is inspiration in and of herself. And definitely not because when I came back from military duty for the last 3 weeks, she said that I looked like a scrub. But because unlike TLC, scrub or not, she'll love me. And what's important to remember of this debate, in a world where the biggest cricketer in the entire world is also the brand ambassador for the biggest skin whitening product that sweeps 1 billion people, in a world in which she sat there listening to other parents from the community tell her that's not the correct way to raise your child doing said things. Actually, you're better off taking them to camp, letting them ride around on horses and making them play the guitar. She was able to think independently. And this is something that is stopped in a world where we tell people that the active way to go about things is not to use your own discretion, as various people in the audience have pointed out. You say, look, sometimes it's probably worth learning how to play golf or learning a skill, but actually realizing that there is no end, right? And realizing that you always should be that yes person that conforms to the way the majority thinks. I'm going to posit 2 questions at the end of the debate that I think by and large cover all the material had here and the excellent questions asked by the floor. The first is, will this emphasis, i.e. will people ever be able to really get this message from minority backgrounds of picking up majority culture? I think there's 2 points to note here before I get into the material of this debate. The first is, contrary to the question from the floor, I think that changing is not the same thing as conforming. This debate requires conformation towards the majority. Changing could be having a growth mindset. It could be thinking about ways you personally can improve, but noting crucially the word personally. It comes from your set of circumstances and the way in which you think and your own ideas, rather than thinking about the way in which the majority hold their ideas and targeting such that you fulfill that quota. The second thing to say is, contrary to what proposition have tried to spun in this debate, the degree to which you can relate to people and say, we listen to the same type of music is true. What is not true is you cannot then go on a tangent about your differences. The exact reason that they pointed out, because that becomes an alienating feature. What does this look like? When people say, you listen to rap music, you say, sure. They go, bro, have you heard Certified Lover Boy by Drake? And you, as a fan of Malaysian rap music, go, oh, I can't really have this conversation. I feel uncomfortable saying that's not the kind of rap I listen to. It's a different form of rap. It isolates you from the conversation at that very moment. Proposition the team of superficiality, of getting you on the golf course and teaching you to play. Opposition the team that says, actually, regardless of whether you play golf or not, your integrity will shine through and shine through for people in a variety of ways. It will shine through better for 3 reasons. The first is the imposter syndrome spoken to you by my first speaker, where people feel like they do not belong in the skin that they are currently possessing because they are told alternative things. That might be coming from your parents who just want you to have the best thing in life, the best view and the best way in which to succeed, where unfortunately they feed down narratives such as the way to do it is not by being yourself and loving who you are. It's by being like that person that is our neighbor and succeeding in the exact way that they have. Want anything on this? Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman? Absolutely brilliant. Note, in the audience question, it was noted as being absolutely exhausting. I think that's massively true. It's really hard to keep up a pretense of who you're not and to keep following all of those links to make sure that you appear consistent. The second thing to say is that it costs a lot of money and a lot of privilege in order to do these types of things. Going to the summer camps where people meet and greet, going to the golf courses where that happens, buying your food from Waitrose and making sure you bump noses with the right kind of people. It is really expensive and not something that everyone has the luxury of having. We note that on our side and we create a fairer system that is more sustainable. The third thing to say is, contrary to their notion that you're able to get people at the table, this is superficial. What this means is you never sit down with people like myself who are other civil servants that struggle massively to get into the civil service and feel ourselves being a minority within the Ministry of Defense because race forums don't exist, because they're telling you should all be MOD civil servants and not think about your own individual stories. It means that people don't come together and say, look, our experiences of this were slightly different and we want to have a group that talks about it. It means that in your show and tell as a child, you don't present the differences of your culture and the things that make you interesting. You present on something generic. All of these things mean that you are never able to successfully interact with this because people don't feel as though they ever properly, even if they could, there are still identifiable differences that mean that it's impossible. The second thing to say is that if you are able to converge, taking them their absolute best, despite the 5 structural reasons we've given you, why is this probably still not a good thing? The first thing to say is it means that you have more groupthink, as Abby pointed out. It means that the ideas of diversity of thought become absolutely tokenistic. And the kinds of things that individuals don't want to raise in board meetings or don't want to raise when stakeholder engaging, because they feel as though it would be alienating and out of place for them to do so. And they feel as though their originality isn't something that is good. The second thing to note, no thank you, is they feel that they cannot talk about their differences. They feel as though they cannot have those conversations and speak about their own individualized experiences other people may share. It creates a very isolating and lonely picture for someone who has struggled their way through the civil service, faced racism, faced discrimination, and doesn't have a group of people that say, me also, you know? And what we're going to do is we're going to make some change about it, and here are the mechanisms on how. The final thing to note is I've just got to put on bilingualism. I think this slide probably stops you speaking your own language and communicating with back home and your diasporas. And actually being bilingual is an incredibly useful thing to do, and something that if you are told consistently, no, we only have conversations in English, ignore the other language that your family speak in, and ignore the other language that people back home do. That's the kind of thing that stops you developing that skill and developing yourself in the process. We've comprehensively won this debate on opposition, both for the people that cannot assimilate and those that are forced to, but mean that they are able to stifle their identity and their own value added. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the speech that we've had from the final speaker from side opposition. And on that basis, I'm very, very happy to call upon the final speaker from side proposition to close the case, not just for his side, but for the debate as a whole. I'm very, very happy to introduce Kenza Wills.
There are many hurdles that Black men face. Whether it be racial stereotypes, profiling, the fact we're overlooked in many ways. We navigate a treacherous tightrope, and there are many opportunities to fall off that path. And I think what mine and Horatio parents had in common is they both wanted to put us in the right rooms. They made sacrifices on our behalf, but their intention was ultimately to help. Side opposition's claim in this debate is that we should burn down the golf courses. But unfortunately, we on side proposition live in the real world, in the knowledge that golf teams will continue to be sponsored, that cigarettes will be smoked, and rugby games will be attended.
Point.
And the question in this debate is, in the knowledge of all those factors existing, what ought we do? We told you that you ought to stand with a side that emphasizes your similarities, that shared sense of unity and identity, in the knowledge that this is the best way for us to cement our progress, to reach the top, and enter the rooms where we can truly affect change. This debate can be summarized into two areas. I'm going to firstly ask, is it legitimate for us to emphasize this similarity? And secondly, what are the advantages of us emphasizing that similarity? On that first question then, is it legitimate for us to emphasize similarity? We're the side that was pragmatic and realistic throughout, and identified a much better approach for minorities to engage with their white co-workers and white managers. Ultimately, this is a question not of hiding your true self, but instead of which narratives you choose to prioritize. So for the majority of side opposition material that was related to you fully abandoning your sense of identity, your ability to speak other languages, it's finally not what the debate was about. Instead, it was, when we're having those conversations, which things do we want to emphasize? Is the fact that we also watch the football, or that we might like to attend the rugby? Or is it ruling ourselves out of those conversations and exiting those rooms altogether? Ultimately, when we thought about the question about making progress or changing as our lives go on, it was ultimately about how we could continue to maintain the social capital that we'd like to have access to. It might look like cutting our hair and suiting up, but it's a question of picking our battles and deciding which grounds we would like to fight on. Side opposition's response to this was to say, you are visibly different, and therefore it'll be very hard for you to assimilate, and in many ways, you will feel uncomfortable in doing so. We have two responses to that as a line of argument, though. The first is to say that just because something might be difficult to do is not a reason not to attempt to do so. But secondly, it is flatly untrue that just because I do not look like a white person and never will be white, mostly because I season my food, it's not a reason for us not to find those shared sense of identity and avoid the sense of groupthink that some of the members of the audience are concerned about. Ultimately, this debate is always going to be finding a balance, and both sides were tempted to run towards the extremes. If we come back towards the pragmatic middle, though, we recognize that there are systematic barriers and hurdles that face those from ethnic minorities. And the question is, how can we equip ourselves with the right spikes and the right movements to leap over those hurdles and make it to the finish line? On the second question then, what are the advantages of us emphasizing the similarities? It is a simple fact that humans naturally look for shared affinities. We know that people are more likely to hire those that look similar to them or share same senses of culture. They're more likely to offer their mentorship and guidance. In many ways, these are motivated by unconscious, uncontrollable biases that are rooted in our sense of fight or flight. We know all of these things to be true. And the question is, what can we do about them? Side opposition's policy was to say we should simply rely on employee resource groups or that unconscious bias training to overcome these generational and long-standing prejudices that are held against those from minority backgrounds. What we said on side proposition is a far more sensible policy, one that looks to proactively overcome those potential burdens and barriers. The response of side opposition to say is that this is equivalent to you denouncing other parts of your identity. But in reality, what it looks like in the status quo is us self-selecting ourselves out of the running. We are choosing not to engage in those rooms because of a fear that it makes us too similar to the majority. The final thing to mention in this debate, and I think I'm running out of time, Ben, so I'll leave it for now. We all live with a duality of self as minorities. The opposition's claim is that you are going to presume a sense of inferiority, or you're going to be ostracized by your family groups or those that are near and dear to you. But in actuality, it's your family that knows best that we all live with a duality of self. The things that I might say here are very different to the things that I might say at home. And there's no shame in doing that. We think that by emphasizing your similarity, you're best able to overcome the barriers that have always been put in our place. And for all of those reasons, we're so proud to stand on side proposition.
From the arguments that you've heard today, have you been persuaded to think differently? Now, the other thing that I want to emphasize just before we actually go to the form of vote, YDWC strongly believes that all people from all cultures love to season food, are interested in and we make no distinction between anyone and their interest in seasoning food. We just make that really, really clear because I don't want anyone chasing me after this debate. So I'm going to stand up so that I can see it clearly and judge it. So as it stands at the moment, the majority has gone to side opposition. A big round of applause. So once again, it's been a real pleasure to be with you having this conversation. It's really important for us to stress the emphasis of this debate was not to see who won. We did produce a winner, absolutely great, but actually it was the conversation that we held. We hope that even if you voted for side yes, side no, or side maybe, you heard things on both sides that made you think, You heard things that helped you to reflect. You heard things that you're actually going to take away and potentially have another conversation with someone else. And for those in the room, you'll chase down the debaters after. And for those who are not in the room, you're going to find someone in the next room to debate with and take them through every argument that you've just heard. But whichever situation that you're in, a really big thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you today. Once more, a bigger round of applause. And more specifically, a really big round, why do I say around? A big round of applause for all of our co-hosts who have made today possible, all of you in the room, every firm that has been a part of making today a success. Big thank you to all of you.